community council surveys for their capital projects were due at the end of May. We received, I think, 16 of them by that day. We had another 5 that hadn't met that deadline. We were aware of that. It was a matter of timing and scheduling, and so we've been working with them to get those, I think, 5 or 6 in. And so really good reception this time. A lot of work from helping our IT and project management and engineering to work more closely with the councils to understand how to use the system, how to submit the projects. And some of you, I know, had some concerns in the past. You took it upon yourself to actually send me an Excel spreadsheet of what they had sent in. It was good so we could compare the two. What you sent us and what was loaded is the same. So what we're doing next is we will be taking those submittals. We'll be working with parks and project management, engineering, facilities. We'll be preparing a list of capital projects. We're going to then be working with the administration probably pretty much through the month of July, and then through continuing to August to build our preliminary 2020 capital program, and we'll submit that to you in October. The goal is to get a little bit ahead of that one so that as we move into the operating budget season, the capital piece is pretty much done. On the operating side of the budget, I've got a draft letter that I want to send out to the directors about some budget guidance as they prepare their 2020 submissions to us. Yes, we are about ready to get into the full swing of 2020. Our budget calendar has the departments submitting their proposed 2020 operating budget to us on July 29th. So they basically have 5 weeks to give it to us. The nutshell on the message to the departments is basically we're going to start off with a continuation budget for departments, which means they have a labor budget and it's $100 and they have members in bargaining units and they go up by 1%. That 1% automatically added in there. Action. Any one-time items, if they got a one-time hit of money, when we roll it into 2020, that one-time item gets taken away. So for those of you who have been through this process before, it's pretty much the way we built 19 in the continuation budget process. So I think that's all I have on 19 and 2020. If you guys have questions, I'm glad to help you address those now or get back to you later.
Doesn't look like there are any questions.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Whitford. Mr. Slifka, you want to lead us in the next item on the agenda?
Certainly. So first, the 2018 CAFR, our annual report, was delivered to our auditor last week, so we are on schedule for July 15th production of the CAFR. Within that, some of the schedules get done early, and so specifically, we have an expected June 28th issue date for ML&P's audit, which is due under the terms of the purchase agreement, so we believe we'll meet that obligation. In terms of what Lance previewed, I'd like Bliss to stand up and tell us what Treasury's seeing for 2019.
Hi. So I'm here in place of Dan. So I have a very brief update, but also we're really early in the year. So right now we have information through mid-June, and the General Government 100 Fund revenues are currently projected to be within $1 million of the budget. Right now that's a positive variance, so that's good. Again, it's early in the year. There's much uncertainty about some of the revenue sources, so we'll continue to update our projections each month, and we'll submit summary tables to the Assembly. The summary tables right now should be coming up on the agenda soon. I don't know the exact week that will be on it, but it should be soon. One important update will hopefully come in July, and that's when the State Division of Community and Regional Affairs will calculate the final amounts for community assistance, and that is to be distributed by the state to each community. Our fiscal year 2019 budget assumes the same amount as last year, which is $6.1 million. But we expect to know the final amount sometime in July after the state's budgets are final and signed by the governor.
I have a question if no one else does. How does this debate over the PFD, how could that impact revenue? What numbers are we sort of looking at?
So right now the budget assumes a PFD check of $2,500. So revenues from PFD garnishments could fluctuate by several $100,000 higher or lower depending on the final amount of the PFD check.
Okay, but it's only a few $100,000 even if it were down to $1,600 or something.
I believe that's what the variation could be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doesn't look like there are any other questions. Great, thank you. Thank you, Bliss.
Oh, actually, I do have a
Oh,
question.
Mr.
I'm sorry, I have a
Ramos.
quick question. It just occurred to me since we have you here. We are going to be talking, I think at our next meeting, maybe meeting after, about raising the age to purchase cigarettes to 21. When do you think we will start seeing those? Is that our next budget or the budget following? Are we building in those revenue assumptions? So we assume there'll be some fall in revenue, correct?
Mhm. So I have a little bit of information about that. I may have to ask Eric for a little bit more clarification, but the impact could be about $200,000 to $300,000 worse if the legal age for buying tobacco is raised to 21 this year.
Okay, and then, so that would be $500,000 next year then? Is that about what you're assuming? Okay.
Depends on how many start smoking.
Right. I sort of suspect, unfortunately, that the fall in revenue will be smaller than that. That makes sense. But we'll see.
We've also talked about the possibility of exploring taxing e-cigarettes. So, to see where that goes.
Later.
Yeah, later. Yes, but in terms of sort of long-term revenue and how that plays out. Anything else? Okay, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Nolan, you're up for report from the BAC.
Thank you. I'm Nolan Clouda. I chair the Budget Advisory Commission. So we did not meet in the month of June. We had a lot of conflicting schedules, and so we're going to meet in July. We usually don't meet in July and do meet in June, so we're just flipping those this time around. But I thought that we had. I did want to briefly update you on what we've been generally working on, and also to take any input and any requests that the Assembly may have from us. Our big priorities for the coming months are to play a role with the 2020 budget prep. We're being a lot more proactive in terms of weighing in at key touch points during the budget preparation cycle. So we've been working closely with Lance on milestones and looking for ways that our input could be useful in the crafting of the budget as that progresses. We have been looking at exempt properties, property tax exemptions as well, and ways that those could be looked at. That's been a topic, of course, that always comes up, and so I had updated this group on that prior. A big thing that we think is pretty actionable for us in the short run is re-examining the spending cap that currently exists, and that's I know that you guys have all taken a look at this at some point, I think, except maybe some of the newer members. But we have a spending cap in addition to the tax cap that has a different calculation, and there is some burden as to how that's calculated each year with OMB, and also just some past inconsistencies with how it's been applied. So it hasn't always taken into account, or it hasn't taken into account the formula, new construction and added to the property tax base or improvements, voter or legally mandated spending, and so there are some tweaks that could be made to that, and there was a draft ordinance in 2016 that wasn't acted upon that we've been looking at, and so what I think we're probably going to dive into that in a work session and produce some recommendations, a resolution or maybe some draft language or some maybe edits to the existing draft ordinance. So that's something that we hope is useful. It would alleviate some confusion, some administrative burden, I think, clarify that process. And also the stormwater utility needs, we've been following that process and eager to weigh in when that subject is ready to be addressed.
Looks like Ms. LaFrance has a question. We'll go to you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Frankston.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So on the stormwater utility, one, I would say, how involved has the commission been in? Because I know we're coming up with an alternative funding source. I know that's one area Mr. Falsey is working on, and I don't know if there's an update or if that's something that your group has been engaged with.
We, through the chair, we've been informed on it by Mr. Backenstead, and so we've followed the progress of its development, but we had been we'd been told that it wasn't quite ready for us to act on yet, and that might not be the case still, but the last time that we came up in discussion, that was where we left it. The group has repeatedly mentioned that we want to look at it and that we're interested in making recommendations on it, so as a new revenue source. So we do see it as an issue of pretty high importance.
Mr. Neville?
Yeah, I want to first thank you for continuing to look at the stormwater utility. When I was the chair and sitting at the BAC, I repeatedly asked you guys to take that on, so I'm really glad you have. I have a couple of suggestions. First, the property tax exemption discussion has been going on since I got on the assembly, and it's sort of, I sort of believe that the useful part of that discussion has sort of already come and has already borne fruit. That is, the sprinkler tax exemption, some of the changes we did to the size of the residential property tax exemption, we already did that work. The remaining discussion about taxing nonprofits, for example, I think is a little bit of a policy dead end. That's just my opinion. So, but the degree to which you could de-emphasize that and work on other things, I personally think that's more fruitful. The last thing is, it came up in the last set of questions. I do think there is a renewed interest in talking about taxing e-cigarettes. I think that's going to, you have at least a month before we even start thinking about that, because I think we want to work on Tobacco 21 first. But if in the coming months you guys would be willing to explore that and look into it, I think it's something that sort of fits in your mission statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the property tax discussion, I was the minority on it, not as interested in pursuing it. The others were interested, but we also adopted a philosophy of let's figure out if we can do something here quickly, and if not, move on. It has been our general approach. So that is where things stand on it now. But I do appreciate your comments on it. And on e-cigarettes, we are, as a group, we have a lot more interest in figuring out revenue sources like that. So that is something I think you and I have discussed a little bit before, and I would be interested in what work's been done to date that we can pick up and look at.
Yeah, I have a very preliminary set of research that was done by Rose Foley, the predecessor to Ms. Camacho, and I could share that with you.
Thank you.
And just quickly before Mr. Dunbar goes, I should note that Forrest and I, along with Nolan and 2 other members of the BAC, are going to meet in a week or so just to go over all of these topics, sort of talk more in depth about ways they could assist the Assembly. Obviously, we welcome your feedback too, but we'll be sort of diving deeper into that. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. And the tax on the e-cigarettes was excise, I think, was the conversation. And, but I don't know, whatever tools you have. I have 2 questions that I don't know if they're within the scope of the Commission to contemplate, but it would be great if it is. First one, it's a more broad question. What are the impacts of various new revenue options being discussed at the state? So, or not being discussed for that matter. Income tax, flat tax, PFD, garnishments or takings. What are the impacts of those on the Anchorage community, on the Anchorage government?
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, we are very interested in how the state budget discussion is going to impact the municipality. We've mainly been thinking about it more on the expenditure cutting side, or as I think you guys have been. Which of those do you see as the highest priority? I think the tax thing, I feel like, is not really being discussed seriously.
Right. Well, but the purpose of the question is to understand the impacts of the various methods on our citizenry and on our government, so that we can formulate a policy on which is of best value to us in terms of minimizing negative impacts and maximizing achieving our goals. And so I don't have an answer to your question back to me. I'm seeking inputs from the Commission to understand the impacts of the various sides so that we can have a reasonable conversation with some kind of thoughtful inputs.
Through the chair, thank you. I think that there probably is a lot that we could look at there, and I think if you have other ideas, I'd love to hear more on those.
I think that's enough to start, and we can talk offline about other details, but I would love to understand the ramifications, meaning on the various potential forms of revenue generation the state's going to do.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson?
So back to the stormwater utility, I suspect now's a good time to look at it, but if you were looking at it, what would you be looking at?
Through the chair, Mr. Welton, any kind of the political environment around it, I think, would be one subject. What's the willingness to pay or potential hurdles. We do have a group that's pretty good at discussing multiple different sides of an issue, so potential obstacles on that front would be one area. To the extent that there are different options in terms of the implementation or the rates that are applied, that's an area we would be interested in looking at. Any of the, but I mean it's fairly open-ended. I think what we want to do is get guidance on where the unknowns are and where our input would be the most valuable on it. We think that something like that is something we really do have to be engaging in, and how we do it really should depend on where we're most useful and what others are wanting from us.
Any other questions for Mr. Clobber? Oh, yeah, Alex.
I was just going to offer out that you should expect to see the enabling language for the stormwater utility within the next couple of meetings. It's been drafted, we're just reviewing. So we've heard the message, and we're going down that path.
And so how does that relate to the funding question?
So in general, the first thing is we are going to hire, and I think I've put out for bid already and have, I think, possibly received bids for a person to help us organize the utility. There was some initial work done in terms of what it would look like. The funding question that the finance department is trying to answer is how do we find the money to pay for that organizational setup? The ongoing operation would be as a utility where we believe these organizational costs would be recovered through rates. So the real questions are, what are the rates? What's the area? How are we going to integrate both state and federal regulations and things like that? And that's the purpose of it. But in order to get the money to start the work, we have to set up the utility, or at least the language.
Thank you. Any other questions?
And one other thing if I could add, Madam Chair, we also have a couple of vacancies on the commission. We've had a couple of members that have left, and so two vacancies at the current moment, and then there are I think 3 or 4 of us that are up for renewal. So so that's another thing to keep on your radar screen is folks that might be a good addition to our group. We do have a pretty good mix of folks that are government, nonprofit, and a couple of private sector folks, including some business owners, but we could probably use more input on the business side of things.
Jason, were you listening to that? We can repeat it if not. Wow, so good at multitasking. Could you, since your role is to help with the appointment process, right? Could you speak to if there's anyone lined up for the BAC or sort of where you guys are at in filling the seats?
To answer the question, Lance and I have had conversations about the folks that are going to be potentially up for reappointment. So those will be coming. BAC is actually one of the ones that actually run July 1st is their end date, not the normal October 14th one, the vast majority of them. And then there are a few others that I believe Lance and I have talked about as potential folks to fill. So yes, we are aware that there are 2 vacancies, and hopefully here in the very near future we'll have a full BAC again.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Prince?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as far as applying, they still need to, folks who are interested in joining still need to go online and do that process. Because we hear occasional frustrations with the online process. Should they also call you?
They can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will send them your way. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Mr. Kinston?
Just some tactical suggestion to the members: if you are hearing people who are interested in applying, and you know them and you want them to be appointed, it also helps for you to contact the administration and kind of be the grease in the wheel. So, just a suggestion.
Never hurts.
Yeah.
Anything else? Mr. Cloud? Thank you, Nolan. We look forward to brainstorming more.
Yes, thank you.
Now Bill Falsey gets to give his famous report.
The famous report remains truncated, but I will give you a non-audio visual report. We've been tracking defects, which we have now rebranded as requests for change in the SAP system since January, and we've had a category of fast track failures. There were 99 of them that we have added since January 1st, and we are now 63 of them, 63 or 66? 63 of them are complete. We are at 36 that are still in the fast track category. There's been a huge interest in fire, because we made some representations that we would clean out all the IAF defects by 10 days from now, June 30th. There were 11 when we started. We are done with 9 of them. We're down to our last 2. We look like we are going to stick the landing. So that's the update this time around. We can stay running.
I think I'll, okay. Thanks, Mr. Presley. That was actually not the purpose. I've heard from some of the unions that the reason that the numbers are going down is because they're just not reporting them anymore because it's so frustrating. Can you speak to that?
The system certainly is performing better. I don't know that we have a way of teasing that out. The paper pay corrections, like I say, we have not been generating the graphs of the incoming ones because that was taking away from the actual correction of the system. So I don't have good visibility into that. I would say if there is anybody out there who's not submitting a paper pay correction because they are giving up hope, don't do that. That is not helpful for anybody. But that's pretty much all I can give you at this point.
Okay, thanks.
So without getting into specifics of union negotiations, I've sort of heard through the grapevine, actually with a union that isn't currently negotiating with us, but that the administration is starting to take positions now where they're like, we want to negotiate this particular way to be paid or this particular holiday pay or whatever it is, and they're getting the response back from the municipality. We can't do that because SAP won't let us. Like, we can't get the SAP machine to do this thing, and so that is limiting our ability to negotiate. Is that true?
My understanding of that issue, and I'm happy to get all the details on one or whatever, is that there is a pipeline capacity issue, which is if we ask for a lot of changes, we're not going to be able to make change to the system while we're also trying to fix the system we have. So there certainly is a reality where, not right now, if we're going to make some big changes, we are full to the brim on our ability to configure the system. I don't yet know that I've heard of any scenario where someone said, here's what we would like to do, and we said, oh yeah, we'd like to do that as well. And we said, it is impossible because the system we have cannot be configured that way. If that's happened, then we'll put the details on that. But we are trying to be mindful of not over-promising and under-delivering on what we can actually configure the system to do. And as we mentioned before, we are really hoping that we're sort of reaching the end of this long and painful shakeout phase, that by the end of this year, that these 100 fast-track defects will largely be behind us, and so those kind of conversations will also be behind us.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Clemson.
That actually raises the follow-on question then, though. If we have limited capacity to make changes, so we're pushing into our contract negotiations, say we can't do that right now, that's a big if. Does that then push out 3 years for the opportunity for those changes to be incorporated, or are you looking at ways of saying we can do that, but we can't do that until calendar year or whatever at this time? How does that work?
Yes, so Chair, the answer is yes in both ways. There's a couple ways to do it. One, we could say we agree that we're going to do it, and we're going to do it at some future prospective date. The other is just we can say we're not agreeing to it now, but we'll take it up again in a year from now, and then outside of the regular cycle of collective bargaining, we can always do an administrative agreement which amends the collective bargaining agreement.
Fair.
We see that as well.
That's
Yeah.
Thank you. So I kind of have a question related to that. I mean, is someone keeping kind of a master list of all the requests that everybody's wanting that SAP doesn't have the capacity for right now, so that you can kind of like have this menu ready, so when you do have capacity, say, these are our highest request things that we might want to be implementing?
Yes, so through the chair, all of the requests for change, RFCs, are being logged, and those are all being generated internally for the things we want the system to do. In the category of things that have been union requests that we think are palatable, that we'd like to do, I don't think that is a big list, but I certainly can talk to labor relations and see what kind of tracking we're doing. I mean, I haven't heard this to be dozens of requests that we've said no to. I think we probably, on one hand, can count them, but I'll check.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A quick question. Do you know if the SAP support team is at full strength now, or if they're still recruiting or have positions posted?
recruiting at least one, but I don't know.
I think you're right, Bill. I think they're recruiting one for the 5 key leadership positions they were had in plan to do.
And as follow up, and as far as you know, and I know SAP isn't on, or IT isn't on the agenda per se, but as far as you know, that support model is working in terms of saving on consultant fees and costs for specialized.
I think Susie's plan to actually do that transition is working well, and the key is finding the right talent and experience to fill those leadership positions, and I think she's being very thoughtful about who they are and how that team is put together, and so I think she's moving right along.
Thanks. And I'll just add that if it would be useful for the body, we could have Susie come back. My perception, and Mr. Dunbar can speak for himself, but was the last few meetings, it was somewhat clear that things are better and they're hiring people, and we were just getting to the point where she's updating us on how many people she's hired, and it seemed like we could use our time to talk about other things, but happy to have her come back if folks want that, so just let us know.
Mr. Dyson.
We've almost been joined by Mr. Dyson. Anything else? Oh, yeah, sure. France?
Thank you. And this might be a little bit off topic, but actually, Mr. Davidson had brought this up at the special enterprise utility meeting about the possibility of the Merrill Field Airport providing a dividend, and possibly, that was you, right?
Not that I recall, but sounds like a good idea.
Well, I thought
it might have been.
Yeah. What would be the process for going about something like that, moving it to a for-profit, or, well, not so much for-profit, but paying a dividend?
So, through the chair, let me do this quick dive and see if I can figure out the actual answer. The way the code is structured, all of the MUSA, the Municipal Utility Service Assessments, are in one place in the utility chapter, and there it just describes how we do it. And we changed it all. The Municipal Enterprise Service Assessments are all over the place, and I don't know, as I sit here now, maybe I can figure it out, if there is already a process for us to just declare an elective dividend from the airport, in which case you wouldn't have to do anything, just under the budget cycle you would declare one. But whatever the process is or isn't, it could either be done just ad hoc in a budget process if there is no already restriction in code, or it could be set out in code how the process is supposed to work and operationalized in the budget process.
Mr. Dunbar, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was you or someone else who brought that up before. I think I missed that meeting. But it's interesting because I was struck by the opposite impulse when we were having this discussion on Tuesday night's meeting about, and I actually reached out to Mr. Falsey about, well, how much do we get a dividend? The answer was no. Do we take MISA? The answer was yes. But it was very small. It was like, I think, $40,000 or something about that. And my impulse was, well, maybe we should give that back to them. And the reason being that it appears that Merrill Field is struggling. We raised their rates, so hopefully it will be a self-sustaining entity now. But I do think it would be a little bit, what the word is exactly, but to say, like, we need to raise your rates,
right.
so that we could take a dividend. Yeah. I think that would be a little bit tough. If they thrive in the next couple of years, then absolutely. And I'm not
suggesting that.
Yeah.
I was curious because it had been raised.
Yeah.
Maybe even more of a co-op structure, if possible, to incent others. I don't know.
I'm also sort of curious why we own an airport. Why does Municipality of Anchorage own an airport?
Mr. Falsey, I know that's not what you were responding to originally, but did you want to cover that one too?
I'll see if I can come up with a good answer for that one. I'm answering the first one. On the dividend question, a quick review of the code. I don't see anything that governs how you could or shouldn't declare a dividend from the airport. So I think you could do it just through the budgetary process. It would just be appropriating money from Merrill Field to somewhere else. On the Municipal Enterprise Service Assessment, Force is right. We paid $39,000 to general government last year, and $45,000 I think is in the budget this year. The Municipal Enterprise Service Assessment is like a payment in lieu of tax, but for the airport it's a little weirder. The way we calculate it is the net plant in service times the mill rate that's applicable at the airport, which starts to feel like a regular bill, except that we don't include any of the value of the leasehold improvements, so all the hangars here, and we don't include the net plant contributed acquired with FAA funds. So it's a real skinny payment in lieu of tax for the whole of the airport. As to why we have an airport at all, there's a good historical reason, I'm sure.
Well, if we start, I guess my point is, if we start to significantly lose money on the airport, and they ask us, we need you to subsidize with direct property taxes or direct municipal funds, I think we have to have a serious conversation about if it's possible to dispose of an airport.
So, Mr. Constance in the queue, were you going to respond directly to that, or which do you guys want to?
One thing I can follow up on the airport ownership, though. There have been discussions about privatizing airports at the state level, and one of the things that's actually really challenging about that is it is a lot harder for a private entity or even tribal entities to get FAA grants. So to the extent that that machine is really floating on federal dollars, you kind of turn that spigot off. So some public entity, if there is to be an airport, likely owns the airport. And I don't think we're anywhere near the point where the airport can't pay for itself.
Thank you. Mr. Constance?
Yeah, thank you. So we talked about the MISA and payment in lieu of taxes and the possibility of a dividend, but what we did do for sure is we have substantially increased the IGC, the intergovernmental charges that they're paying because of other needed improvements that we've had to do. And so we have effectively taken more than we have in the past because of the function of our operation. And, you know, the idea of a dividend raises a question. They were asking for some kind of tax subsidy, which doesn't make any sense to me. I wonder if we could do a dividend and then do a reverse dividend if they have need, or we actually do supply some funding to them in the lean year, where that actually predicates an actual dividend on the years that are good, and we have built it in. And so there's a kind of an idea that's chewing in the back of my head now that maybe we set up a way to fund them if they need in the short term that would reverse when the flow is different automatically. Anyhow, it's just contemplating.
I guess I would offer up we're working with Merrill-Field to build their financial modeling based on the fee increases that were approved on Tuesday, because that's really going to drive the amount of money they're going to be able to draw down from the FAA. They do have a vision over the next several years of running more to break even and trying to build up a little bit of a reserve fund. So it's not a very big enterprise. I think the total budget is like $2 million a year. So it's really more of a community service type thing. We're just trying to hopefully create a structure where it's self-sustaining, not necessarily running at a level like a utility where it could throw off the city.
Thank you. Oh.
Just a quick question following that. Then, do we have we been presented? I just missed it. The total property taxes generated off of Merrill-Field?
About $500,000, and Bill says it's not included in the MISA because we tax those things.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Half of this. Okay. And is that calculated? Oh, that's ours. Never mind. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. And this is something that's not on the agenda, but I thought about it when we were talking about the boards and commissions there. We appointed some new people to the Board of Equalization. I'm wondering, how are they doing? Is that enough people? Are they just about finishing all those hearings? Does anybody know?
And is Dick Trainee one of them?
I believe Mr. Train actually was not one of them.
Oh.
But that would be Jack, who is our assessor, would be able to speak to that. But they have, I think, been trained up, and from what I've heard, they're working there.
Great.
So I know we have.
I think he decided he declined. He's too busy for our meeting.
Yeah. It's the 12th member.
I know we had a lot more people who were sort of protesting their, assessments. So
I know it wasn't on the agenda, but in terms of what was built into some of the revenue assessments that came through, actually one of the positive variances when we set the mill rate was that we had expected a much bigger impact from changes in property assessments due to earthquakes and things like that, and that actually the impact was a little bit less than what we had expected. So that's been a positive for us.
Good.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think if everyone's good, we might move to audience participation so we can end a little early and have a bathroom break, assuming we only have one member of the audience who wants to participate.
Or none.
There might be more, or none. Yeah, I mean, no pressure, Mr. Haberman.
Then I'll just be very extremely brief. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. All process appropriate decision made by the governing body is more like a conflict of interest. And just note for the record that I came at 12:13. I was late. I was attending last Gas Line Development Corporation Commission board meeting. I was moved just into the outlet building. So in case you were wondering where I'm at, I was there. And that's all to say, except this handout with numbers, and it was presented. It's in black and white and gray. And transparency means be able to read numbers. And with all due respect, maybe you had set this thing as a color sheet, and then it was printed out as a black, a black copy. The end result is those numbers are very difficult to read when you're going through this particular issue about money, budgets.
I'll make a better black and white copy next time.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have to say. And thank you very much. With 1 minute and 56 seconds to spare.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Would anyone else like to give any audience participation? Participate with us? No? Okay. This meeting's adjourned.
Sir.